Hey class, today I wanted to talk a little bit about comma usage, simply because although students often feel like they have a pretty good grasp on commas and that's a pretty basic punctuation mark, I have found that students often don't understand some of the more advanced rules of comma usage, and I frequently see the same mistakes in student papers. So let's dive right in, review some of the basics, and then we'll look at some of the more advanced rules when it comes to comma usage. So first of all, it's important to remember that a complete sentence has at least two parts, that is a subject and a verb. In order to be a sentence, a subject and a verb are both required. So the subject and verb form a complete thought, and that is called an independent clause. Important to know that. So a complete sentence contains a subject and a verb, and it's also known as an independent clause. So here we have an example of an independent clause, the couple dances. If we just said the couple or dances, it would not be a complete thought. In one instance we'd be missing a verb, the other a subject, so both are required to make a complete thought. We have several different types of sentences. We have simple sentences, compound sentences, complex sentences. When it comes to using conjunction words, that typically applies to what we call compound sentences. So I already explained what an independent clause is. It contains one subject and one verb. When we want to join together, let's say two of those independent clauses in one sentence, it's called a compound sentence. So you might say, the couple dances and the other couple sits down. Okay, that's a compound sentence. The other couple sits down is the second independent clause that's joined together to the first one to create that compound structure. And notice that I use the joining word and in this case, which serves as a coordinating conjunction or simply a joining word. So you might remember this from earlier years in school. A conjunction or joining word simply joins together words or phrases in a sentence. There's this acronym, fanboys, that you can use to help remember all of the joining words when it comes to compound sentences and comma usage. That acronym is fanboys. So the joining words that we can use when it comes to joining together independent clauses with conjunctions are for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. So we have another example here. Andy built a snowman and Jeff played with his dog. Notice that the comma always comes before the joining word. So we have one independent clause here. Andy built a snowman. The subject, the verb, and the object. Jeff played with his dog. The subject is Jeff. The verb is played. And his dog is the object of the sentence, okay? And we're joining together these two sentences that could stand alone. So Andy built a snowman could be its own sentence. Jeff played with his dog could be its own sentence. But if we use a lot of simple sentences with subject, verb, structure, it begins to sound like very rudimentary kind of writing. So to add complexity and sophistication to our essays, we write compound or complex sentences, and that requires the use of punctuation, indicating to our reader how these sentences are linked and how these thoughts are intended to relate to one another. So the use of and here is very intentional. The sentence meaning would be different if we use a different conjunction word or a different joining word. If we said Andy built a snowman, comma, so Jeff played with his dog, suddenly the sentence has a slightly different meaning, cause and effect. Jeff is playing with his dog because Andy's building the snowman, rather than just, in this instance, communicating that this is the activities that they happen to be doing at this moment, and there's no relationship, they just happen to both be doing these things. Or we could say, Andy built a snowman for Jeff played with his dog. For basically means the same thing as because. That would be saying, because Jeff was playing with his dog, Andy decided to go build a snowman. So you can see how we use these words carefully when we are linking together independent clauses to form compound sentences depending upon the meaning we want to convey. Okay? Or we might say, lastly, something like, Andy built a snowman, comma, but Jeff played with his dog. That's emphasizing the fact that Jeff is not participating. He doesn't want to build a snowman with Andy. So you can see, even though the differences are nuanced, using a different conjunction word after the comma can change entirely the meaning of a sentence. So in this case, where would you place the comma? Dan struggled with his homework, so his father helped him. Okay, the comma would go after homework. So the comma always goes before the conjunction. In this case, the conjunction is the word so. Dan struggled with his homework, comma, so his father helped him. Notice again, Dan struggled with his homework as a complete thought. His father helped him as a complete thought, and we're simply linking those two thoughts together with this unit of a comma and a conjunction or joining word. So this is something a little bit different. Here we have an explanation of an independent clause. Okay, so a dependent clause. So an independent clause can stand on its own. The couple dances, independent. It's a complete thought. A dependent clause also contains a subject and a verb. So you might think, oh, it's a complete thought, it has a subject and verb. However, it cannot stand alone. Okay, so here are some examples of that. After I went to class, since I like cats, while he drove. Okay, think about that and ask yourself, is that a complete thought? While he drove. And it's not. It's not because a word has been added on. Okay, if we just said, I went to class, I like cats, and he drove, subject, verb, subject, verb, subject, verb, those are complete thoughts. However, we've had these dependent clause markers, as they're called, these words added on to the beginning of these sentences so they can no longer stand on their own. Now, basically, dependent clause means that these clauses here will depend upon more information or another sentence, another clause, in order to become complete. So they depend on something else to be complete thoughts. So you can often identify these dependent clauses by these words: because, since, after, unless, although. And what I'm getting at here, where I'm going with this, is that after a dependent clause, you always place a comma. While he drove, comma. Although I disagree, comma. When I graduate, comma. So you separate the dependent clause from the clause that follows. A dependent clause helps to clarify and add detail to an independent clause. So let's say the sentence was, since I like cats, I volunteer at the animal shelter. So we could have the sentence independently, I volunteer at the animal shelter. Adding on this phrase, since I like cats, adds detail and clarity, helps explain why this person volunteers at the animal shelter. So in all the examples I've been giving you guys, I've been giving you examples of clauses that appear at the beginning of sentences. However, these dependent clauses might appear in the middle of a sentence or at the end. So I'll give you a couple examples of what that would look like. So when a dependent clause is placed at the beginning of the sentence, like all of the models I've been showing you, it's also called an introductory clause because it opens the sentence, okay? So when you find this syntactical structure in your sentence, you always, again, want to place the comma after that dependent clause. So here we have a complex sentence. It's not just compound, it's become complex because we have three different clauses here. One is before he took the test. The second clause is Dan struggled with his homework. And the third clause is so his father helped him. Okay? So before he took the test, We identify this as a dependent or introductory clause, so we know to place a comma after it, comma. Dan struggled with his homework, so his father helped him. And then we would note here, okay, this is a complete thought, and this is a complete thought, and these two ideas are being linked together. It's a joining word, so we're going to go ahead and place that comma before the joining word. So the comma comes after the dependent clause, and the second comma comes before the joining conjunction that's linking together the two independent clauses in the sentence. So we have a dependent clause, an independent clause, and a second independent clause. So where do you think you would place the comma in this sentence? Because it was raining, we decided to go to the movies. And notice that there's a natural pause there where the comma goes. Correct, it goes after raining. So this is the dependent clause. Because it was raining, we decided to go to the movies. And the comma is really separating the dependent information from the independent clause, the part of the sentence that can stand on its own. So the dependent or introductory clause is highlighted here in purple. So now a caveat to this rule. When a dependent clause comes after the independent clause, you do not place a comma between the two, okay? So you only use a comma after a dependent clause when it comes, in this case, at the beginning rather than the end of a sentence. If it comes after, you don't use a comma. So we decided to go to the movies because we were bored. Some people make the mistake of placing a comma here. Another example might be, I didn't study for the test, although I needed to. And some people might decide they want to put a comma before that although. You don't do that, okay? So when you have the dependent clause here, located in the second half of the sentence, there's no comma, and that's just the rule, okay? So make sure you don't do that because that's technically incorrect. So one other rule that is perhaps more advanced and students don't think about as often is the rule of commas and non-essential information. Okay, so let me explain what I mean by that. An essential phrase in a sentence is used to modify a noun, basically adding more details that are critical to the meaning of a sentence. Hence, it's an essential clause. So in this instance here, the people who work in my office are loud. Okay, so if we just said the people are loud, that would be a very vague statement. It would be hard to understand who you're referring to. So this designation, the people who work in my office, becomes essential to understanding the intended meaning of the sentence. If we cut this out, the sentence would no longer be conveying the same message clearly. So that's why this phrase is essential, because it's indicating specifically what people were talking about, which people we're talking about, and we need to know that in order to understand the message that's being conveyed here. So the word that is almost always an indicator that a phrase is essential to a sentence. So the tiramisu that I had at Joe's was great. Okay, now we could just say the tiramisu was great, and that would be a complete thought. However, we're talking about a specific tiramisu that we ate. It was a tiramisu from Joe's house. That was a great tiramisu. So that's why this part of the sentence becomes essential. So we do not set it off with commas. It just stands alone. No commas at all in this sentence. Now, a non-essential clause or phrase adds extra information, but that extra information can be eliminated without changing the sentence's meaning. So in an essential clause, if you eliminate the information that's essential, the meaning of the sentence is changed. With a non-essential phrase or clause, you can erase the non-essential information and, let's say, or it still means the same thing, okay? So let's say in this example that you only have one brother, okay? So My brother plans to throw a party. Now, it's interesting to note, perhaps, that he lives across town, but this clause here is not essential to understanding the basic message, which is my brother's throwing a party. Also, it's an extra detail. He also happens to live across town. But if we delete this, the message that the writer wants to convey is not changing. We still understand exactly what is intended to be conveyed here. There's nothing crucial that we suddenly are missing when you delete that. So because this information here in the sentence is not essential, we set it off with commas. My brother, comma, who lives across town, comma, plans to throw a party. And keep in mind, if this information was essential, okay, if it was essential information, you would not use commas. You set off the commas sort of to indicate that it's extraneous information, almost like you would with parentheses, okay, to indicate that it's a little bit of extra information added in to provide some detail, but it's not essential. Steve said that he had proposed to me on Valentine's Day, which is my favorite holiday. Okay? So here, you might ask yourself, well, how can I know whether the information is essential or not? So you ask yourself, if this is deleted, does the sentence still convey the same message? Steve said that he had proposed to me on Valentine's Day. What is the main point of the sentence that's being conveyed here? That Steve will propose on Valentine's Day. Do we need to know that it is the writer's favorite holiday to understand the main point? No. We could delete this completely, and all the information we really need to know that's essential to the meaning of this main clause here is still being conveyed. And the fact that it's the writer's favorite holiday, it's an interesting side note, but it's not crucial to understand the meaning of the sentence. So hopefully that makes sense. So because of that, we use a comma here to indicate that it's not essential. And typically, when you have the word that, you will, actually, when you have the word that, you never use a comma in front of the word that when it's joining together clauses, and you always place a comma before the word which. So be sure that you're using which correctly versus that when you're trying to decide is it that or which in a sentence. The which is indicating non-essential information versus that, which is indicating essential information for the sentence. So last but not least, guys, where would you place commas in the following sentences, if at all? Sentence 1, I am planning a trip to Paris, which is one of the greatest cities in the world. Okay, so based on what we just talked about, if I asked you, okay, what's the subject of the sentence? I, and what is the verb? I'm planning, okay. What's the main point of the sentence? Well, that I'm planning a trip to Paris is the main point of the sentence. It's one of the greatest cities in the world. Is that crucial to understand the meaning of the sentence? No. The main point is here. So this is the independent clause. This is non-essential information. So does it need a comma? Yes. Where does it go? Before the non-essential information. So we place the comma here before which. Okay. Second sentence, the place that I would most like to see is the Eiffel Tower. So, trick question or not? We place a comma here after place. Place, comma, that I would most like to see, comma, is the Eiffel Tower. No, we do not. The sentence does not have any commas. So, we could try and cut this out and see what happens to the sentence. The place is the Eiffel Tower, but if we cut out this clause here, we're losing essential information to understand the sentence's meaning. So the place that I want to see is the Eiffel Tower. That's the main point. We can't delete any of that information here, cut out any of it, or we will lose something critical to the sentence's structure. So there are no commas here, everything is essential, and we don't have any dependent clauses embedded at the beginning of the sentence. Lastly, but not least, Pierre, who's one of my business contacts, meet me at the airport. So subject, Pierre, verb phrase will meet me, okay, and then we have a prepositional phrase here, at the airport. So the main idea is Pierre will meet me at the airport. Pierre will meet me at the airport. Now we have this other phrase embedded here, who is one of my business contacts. Pierre, who is one of my business contacts, will meet me at the airport. So I think you probably see where I'm going with this. This is not essential to the main point or the main meaning intended to be conveyed. It's extraneous or extra information. So you place commas here. Pierre, comma, who is one of my business contacts, comma, will meet me at the airport.